Welcome to VolleyTalk alongside me, Nelson. I'm Elliot Skelly. Joining us today, the head coach of the St. Charles Cardinals and president of the Ohio Boys Volleyball Coach Association, Ned Gruber. Coach, how you doing?
Good, guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, happy to have you on. So what I thought was really interesting about the first match of the season, I feel like most coaches, they can help it, want to try to start 1-0, but you kind of went after the top dog in the state in St. X. First set was a little rough, but second set was really close. You even took the third set. Can you speak to the decision behind going up there and playing them to start the season?
Yeah, that was actually one of our last matches that we scheduled with the cycle. We had room for one more. I was trying to find somebody, obviously a really quality program with St. X. So it just worked out that we were on spring break kind of that first week. So we were able to travel down there on a weeknight. So we were able to leave earlier. So that made it work. And then Pick North, we're playing them at the end of the year. Those were kind of our two last matches that we were able to schedule. And we were thinking about maybe doing a try because St. X was looking for a date to come to Pick North, but we just ended up doing them as singles. So it was a great experience. I had never been there as a player or as a coach. So it was fun to travel down there. Obviously, a good test right at the beginning. Traditionally, we had gone to Mount Vernon that first weekend, and we went up to St. Ed's this year instead. So we always like to play somebody, pretty good at the beginning, just to, we do this work in the preseason, and we want to see where we're at and see what we need to work on. So it was a fun test, and we took a set from them. First set
Yeah.
was very rough. First set made me question, what are we doing here? But then we pulled it together a little bit and played pretty well the rest of the match.
Well, hey, since then you've been doing pretty well. You won 15 straight matches, one of the top teams in D2. Unfortunately, came a bit to a halt this weekend where you lost to Fenwick in 4 sets at the tri match. First loss in Division 2, but you're able to get the sweep against St. Vincent St. Mary. What were your thoughts about how your team played this weekend?
Yeah, Fenwick, really good team. They brought a lot of firepower. Their middles are especially really good, but they're a well-balanced team, and they've got a lot of experience too. So to me, that loss is a great learning experience. Like you said, we had been kind of on a hot streak, and losing is good for the soul sometimes. You can cover things up a lot when you're winning, and sometimes it's hard to get buy-in of making changes because we're winning, so why change too much? So I think we learned a lot this weekend, more about ourselves, and obviously Fenwick's a great team. We'd love to, play them again, maybe in the tournament. But I think it gave us a lot that we can work on. We've been playing a lot of matches this past couple weeks. So once we finish out our league schedule this week and we go down to the GCL Challenge, I'm going to be excited to kind of have a week where we can mostly just practice, learn from what we've done the past couple weeks, and hopefully we'll get to play them again.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you schedule a lot of these matches, such as the try this weekend, are you thinking ahead to the playoffs and some of these big matches, get those guys ready for May in general?
Yeah, definitely. We always like to challenge ourselves, and usually it's on those Saturday try matches where we can bring people in. We're in a good location in Columbus where we can usually draw somebody from the north, somebody from Cincinnati or Dayton to meet in the middle. And so we always like to play those top D2 teams on our schedule, and it served us pretty well. We've had pretty good success, and also again, it just gives us a chance to see what we need to work on. And the nice thing about our league schedule, it's a little different than the OCC, is that we have flexibility. We only have 6 league matches every year, so we're not locked into a bunch of matches. So it gives us flexibility to bring in some of these big Saturday matches.
Yeah, well, I mentioned in addition to being the head coach of St. Charles, you're the president of the Ohio Boys Volleyball Coach Association. Can you describe what that role looks like?
Yeah, it's a little different than it was in the past. So before we got sanctioned by the OHSAA, we have really two separate bodies back then. We had the governing body who ran the state tournament, all the regional tournaments, all that kind of stuff. And then separate from that was the Coaches Association. So the real role of the Coaches Association is player awards. So we run all the regional, all state voting for player awards. We do a scholar athlete award, and then we also typically do a coaches clinic. So that's kind of our role right now. The OHSA has taken over all the governing body things of running the regional tournament, state tournament, that kind of thing. So right now, our main focus for the end of the year is going to be just player awards, getting everybody's votes tabulated and all that kind of stuff, making the awards, handing those out. I've been doing that for like 8 years now. So to be honest, I'm kind of ready. It was a 2-year term when they got me 8 years ago. They said, "Oh, you do it for a couple years." So I'm ready to pass the torch. So if any of your viewers are wanting to take over, a younger coach wants to take over, I'd be happy to pass the torch anytime.
Yeah, there you go. So behind the scenes, what did it look like the transition from the OHSPBA to OHSAA?
Yeah, it was a lot of conversations, and I think the OHSA did a nice job of listening to what our coaches had to say. Obviously, they want to transition things into their model that they use for other sports, that they use for girls volleyball. But Emily Mason from the Ohio High School Athletic Association has been a great contact. She always hears us out. She can't always, change things the way maybe we would want to change them, but I think we have a good relationship, and we on our coaches association side do a lot with like trying to help new programs get started, coach education, uh, just helping answer any kind of questions, because that's one of the biggest challenges is, if you're a brand new program, how do you get your board to sanction you, or how do you get a coach, how do you get equipment? Those kind of things are what we're focusing on mostly now. And it's different everywhere is kind of the hard answer. Is it depends on what your school will let you do. Some teams start as a club team and then they work their way up. Some get board approval right away. So a lot really depends, but we've seen a lot of growth. If you look at the tournament numbers this year, I think you're going to see we got substantial growth. I think about 15 to 20 new teams this year participating in the tournament that did not last year.
Yeah, it's been a big change overall. It's been 2 years since it was announced that OHSA would take over boys volleyball as a sanctioned sport. It's now the second year where OHSA has boys volleyball. What went well, and what do you think could have gotten better off that transition?
Yeah, I think the transition for the state tournament, going from 8 teams in D1 to just 4 was tough for some regions, especially the South, because a lot of times, they could have 2 or 3 of the top 5 teams in the state, and it can kind of be frustrating for them to say, hey, we could have made the state tournament in the old format. We could have been in the final in the old format, and now we're, losing in a regional semi or regional final. So that's kind of been a bone of contention for some people. Uh, they've balanced the regions pretty well geographically, so things are pretty even. I think that's been pretty good. And then I think every year we're going to have to reevaluate the regions. So this past year we had Emily Mason kind of just made them on her own, and then this year we had a group of coaches, a couple people from the north, a couple people from the south, a couple people from the central. So we kind of rebalance things a little bit. Like Carroll in D2 is going to come up to the Columbus region to kind of balance out that south, that Dayton region. Yeah. So as far as my region's concerned, that was kind of the biggest change there. But it's all cyclical, because there have been years when in the central, DeSales, Waterson, St. Charles, we had Mount Vernon for a couple of years. We were all really good beating up on each other. So I think things will balance out, and as we add more teams, things will balance out in the wash. But the 8 teams to 4 teams has been interesting. I would love to see maybe like a crossover, like you get to your regional final, and then we start crossing over. Whether we play the games at the state tournament site or not, even like getting to an Elite 8 and then just crossing over would be really cool. But again, the OHSA doesn't do that in other sports, so they're probably not going to just do it for us.
Yeah, for sure. Now, taking a look at your coaching staff, you get a coach with your brother, Joe Gruber. How special is it to be able to run the program with family?
It's awesome. Yeah, he and I are really close. He actually coached me when I played at St. Charles. He was one of our JV coaches, assistant coaches. It's a lot of fun. We get to get after it in the gym together. We're always following you guys, following Max Preps, staying in touch with things in the state. So we'll text each other and be like, "Hey, did you watch that game? Did you see this result?" It's a lot of fun, and he coached me too when I played here, and he helped assist on one of our teams when we won the state championship. So he's got a lot of experience. It's really nice to have him. He's a good calming presence. Sometimes I'll say like, "Hey, should we do this?" And he's like, "No, we should not do that." So he's able to we balance each other out. So it's a nice relationship.
Another set it's always great. Speaking of that state championship team, do you feel like there are similarities this year with this team and that championship run?
Yeah, in some ways, yes. We got a good core group of guys who have played club, and then we have some other role players or really good players who don't, which was similar to our 2008 team. Every team's different. I mean, so when I was a player, we actually won in 2009, my senior year. And then in 2018, we won when I was coaching and Joe was coaching too. And they're all different. But like the loss to Fenwick that we just had, my senior year, we lost to Hoban, we lost to Roger Bacon, and then we played him again in the tournament and ended up beating him. So I was talking to the guys. Obviously, it's tough to lose this match, but with high school sports, you never know. I mean, a lot can change in 3 weeks. I think just having that experience of having gone through state tournaments before helps our guys. Some of their older brothers have played and done those things. So a lot of our guys now are coaches too. They coach for the middle school teams around here, so they've got a lot of experience in tournaments, and I think that helps us. They like to see things from the other side as coaches, and then I think that helps them as they're playing this year.
Well, finishing out the schedule, you got a match against Archbishop McNicholas, which will be big. You mentioned the GCL Challenge, pick North. How important is a strong finish to set up a postseason run?
Yeah, definitely. We've had a couple injuries here, just kind of tweak stuff. So we're getting back from those. So obviously we want to kind of get back on the right track here. And we got some good matches coming up that weekend. Obviously we got our league matches with Waterston and Hartley this week. And then we're going down to play Carroll and CJ, Chaminade Julienne, and then McNicholas again. So that'll be a fun weekend. It's only 2 out of 3 down there for that Saturday event. So yeah, definitely want to get back on the right track and see what changes we need to make for the final push, but also see if we can make some stuff this week to get a little bit better, and guys coming back from injury a little bit, getting them back to full strength so that for the tournament we can make our final push.
Absolutely, man. Really excited to see how you guys can do, and thanks again for coming on.
Yeah, appreciate your time. Thanks, guys.
All right, that was Ned Grber. Thanks to him for coming on. Also, to get some D2 coverage. Obviously, St. Charles is one of the top programs this year, so really cool interview. So looking over at some of the stuff that happened this week, we had St. X play Moeller in another GCL Friday matchup. St. X was able to get the win in 4. What I noticed about that matchup, I think through that matchup, we'll talk about what happened at the Elite Eight after, but through that matchup, I think the only sets that St. X drops is mainly because of service issues. And then outside of that, when they are on, they're on. I mean, the scores like 25-15, 25-17 over a great team like Moeller. I mean, it's just St. X dominance.
Exactly. I think the biggest thing, like you touched on, is the serves, and that's the one thing that's really been bogging them down. And I think you can get that feeling at 600 North Bend Road. When that team is on fire, it feels like nothing can stop them at times. But again, those missed serves, it just feels like there's that one set where they lapse up and all of a sudden they've got to recover. That's the reason why we haven't seen St. X get a lot of these sweeps, which in reality would help them a lot in terms of their playoff resume.
Absolutely. And, we look at that Centerville Elite Eight tournament, Olentangy Liberty, with Austin Mallory coming back as their libero, able to get the win over St. X in 4. From my perspective, they're the only team that I've seen that's taken a legit set where they are just playing better than X. And it wasn't actually service issues. That first set looked like normal St. X domination. I believe 25-16. X was serving hard. Liberty couldn't really capitalize on it. Liberty ends up coming back, taking a close second set. Third set, I mean, it was just back and forth all the way to the end, ended up being 30-28. And I counted 5 St. X set points that Liberty was able to defend. I mean, just something to watch there. It was really an impressive match. The thing I was looking at the whole tournament, it just seemed like when Brady Jones goes up on that 31 or that push 1, seemed to be scoring at will. Like I was saying in my head, it's an at will scoring system. They can't stop it. He's so high, he has so much space, he can put it down wherever he wants. Liberty, now, like, they didn't house him per se, but they were able to dig that stuff out and actually run an offense off that. And I think that really threw St. X off. I don't know if this is a real statistic, but it's, from my money, I think Liberty's the best team in the state at getting some crazy impressive day and then just immediately getting a kill off it. It's something unlike I've seen from any other team. Definitely the ability of Caden Whiteside, who I thought was the best player to play at the Elite Eight, and Jay Cook and Jack Torson through the middle, just high efficiency swings, able to put balls down in a way that no other team can to really challenge St. X. Now, they were without their right side Drew Tiger. So that was, I think, a big loss, especially for blocking a guy like Caden Whiteside, who probably will end up being the state player of the year when all things are said and done. It will be interesting. Unfortunately, we haven't seen both teams at full strength play this season. So should they meet in a state semifinal or state final, it'll be a really interesting rubber match. And, based on the way the tournament shook out, it was St. X over Moeller in the semifinals and Liberty over Darby in the semifinal. Really, I mean, maybe the scores were close, but I think the people there will tell you, like, it seemed pretty low effort. Like, the level that St. X and Liberty are playing is just so much higher than the other teams. I don't know. It's something I think unlike we've seen to see two teams that far above. Speaking of Moeller, they started off their day with a sweep of Brecksville and a very competitive 3. Casey Pieper, I think we've been saying his name wrong. I learned also. He was telling me he was surprised by how good they were. So they had a really impressive day too. They went on to actually take down St. Ignatius in 3 as well. So we talked about they couldn't get them on the schedule for that North Region preview, but they were able to play each other through the Elite Eight. So impressive by Brecksville. They'll probably, assuming they don't take any uncharacteristic losses, probably end up being the 1 seed in Region 2 from that point. Darby also had a really impressive day. They started their day off knocking off St. Ignatius in a 5-setter, and then lost to Liberty in the semifinals. And then for the third place match, they went up 2-0 against Moeller, and then Moeller won the third and fourth. Thought maybe it could be a reverse sweep just like last year, but Darby's able to run it and get the win in 5 against them too. Really, really quality win. I was really impressed with what I was seeing from the Darby team. I would say biggest reason that I could pick out, they have 2 middles, not short guys, but not necessarily huge guys either. But the quick tempo they run and the versatility of those guys that can put it down really helps them out a lot. And it just catches teams lacking when how much they can be in system and how much they can score through the middle.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing too with Darby is just how they played in general. Is we saw it to some extent last year. I don't think we saw it as much as we saw it this year, though, is the fact that they struggled at times in OCC play. But again, this is the biggest stage of the year in terms of the regular season, and you walk away with 2 quality wins. Again, none of us, including us, expected Darby to get that win against St. Ignatius. They get that, and then you take it against a team like Moeller has a lot of competition in the GCL South that Darby has a lot to be proud of off this weekend.
Oh, 100%. And, we also talked about Elder maybe dealing with some injuries. I was able to talk to Sean Tierney. His son, Tommy, said there's no structural damage, but there's just some overuse stuff in his shoulder. So, it can explain some of the tough results that they've had in the past couple of weeks. But hopefully he'll be back for playoff run. He'll be back strong whenever. Honestly, I want to say, like, even though it was like the 7th play match, like Elder and Centerville really are pretty good teams. Like, I think it's just the quality of volleyball going on in the Elite Eight tournament. Not that necessarily needs to be said, but it's not like these are slapshot teams. They're still very good teams.
And I think the biggest thing too is it kind of shows the type of growth, right? When I know we talk about a lot of these other teams that frequent the top 10, but take a look at Centerville, right? And Centerville always hosts this tournament. Maybe they'll take a set against a quality team, but at the same time, they continue to fight. They continue to show out at times. And again, this is not the Centerville team we saw 2 years ago or 3 years ago, but it just shows the type of schemes that have been changing. And we talked about it last week with what's happening in GWAC. And I think overall, this type of change is very helpful for the sport in the state.
Yeah, absolutely. So big result for Lakota East. Despite some of the maybe injuries that Elder's dealing with, to go to the pit and sweep Elder, I mean, in the fashion that they did, it really does not happen all that often. For a team to come in, especially a non-GCL team, to come in and sweep Elder in the pit. So really impressive win for the Lakota East. I think speaks to their program's growth. They're one of the best, I think, in the Dayton area at getting youth programs going. So that's really awesome for them.
Again, the type of growth we saw from Lakota East, right? This was a 5 seed, lost to Loveland at home in their playoff matchup, but again, they've rebounded well and they look like a surefire GMC favorite right now in that Cincinnati-Dayton area. I was doing some research before the episode today. There had been no team there's been no previous record of a team that is not in the GCL South beating Elder in 3 sets at the pit. And records go all the way back to 2005. So that's how incredible that result is for Lakota East. That's how incredible that result is in general for Ohio boys volleyball.
That's pretty impressive. So hey, to be the first to do that, that's a pretty good accomplishment for the Thunderhawks. So hey, look, the other big event was the Pick North quad. We were talking about it as a big test for Pick North. They actually swept their way through Old Tangy Berlin, Mount Vernon, and Beaver Creek. Now it's worth noting everything was competitive, but still a big result for them. And we'll talk about they've got St. X coming up. That's they're a real big test. But kind of establishes a new pecking order, I think, in Region One. Obviously, Liberty's way at the top, but below them now, Pick North is pretty solidly in the number 2 spot. And then Mount Vernon's able to overcome, a good Berlin team. So then maybe it's Mount Vernon and Berlin, and that'll kind of impact the seedings a little bit because hey, maybe Pick North only has to play the winner of Mount Vernon and Berlin as opposed to something else like that to see who can end up playing Liberty. Berlin also taking a 5-set loss to Thomas Worthington, which effectively eliminates them from OCC Cardinal conference title race. Not technically, I don't think mathematically, but pretty much based on who they're playing left, they're pretty much out of it. So, rough couple weeks from Berlin, still a good team and still will do some damage in the playoffs. If they get to it, could challenge Liberty in a regional final. But, I think they're probably a little bit disappointed with how this regular season's gone. Probably some higher hopes.
I'm really impressed by Pick North. I talked about it last week that this was going to be Judgment Day. This was the quad that was going to decide, are they in the top 10? Are they a contender? They passed with flying colors. I'm also impressed by Mount Vernon as well, because they've also been a team that, granted, they have a very, very tough schedule. Last year, it felt like they had one of the toughest, if not the toughest schedule in the state. It was kind of the same rapport this year. To get a win against a Berlin side, that's pretty good overall. It gets your confidence up after a lot of these losses, even though it happens at home. Again, when you lose to Moeller, when you lose to St. X, it doesn't help your confidence, right? You get a win against Berlin, relatively in the same region, it helps you out. And again, Berlin just falling on hard times. We haven't seen a Berlin stretch like how we saw, especially last year, where it seemed like they were relatively consistent. They were trying to get into the top 5 this year. They've taken a little bit more surprising losses. And again, it started off with the Jerome loss last week. Mount Vernon, again, like you mentioned, a lot of these are competitive. You're not going to have a lot of these matchups go your way because there's just so many different stakeholders in it. But then again, it just seems that Berlin is getting outmatched in Central Ohio. And again, as we mentioned earlier, it just shows the growth that's happening.
Yeah, and I love the mindset to go competitive. I've talked to Jim about that, and it's, you're obviously in a tough conference at the OCC Cardinal, and like the quads we talked about. I really like how they do it. It's just, I think they were hoping to be a state championship team this year, and just from the looks of it, it's going to be tough to make that. We also mentioned in the interview the win Bishop Fenwick over St. Charles, and then Nick actually played Bishop Fenwick again and swept them. So now it looks like McNick might be the definitive number 1 seed. And more importantly, I think the 1 seed in Region 8 with that result. Assuming they can get through the next couple weeks here without any uncharacteristic losses again, that'll be the big deal there. But I think the battle for number 1 in our Division 2 ranks is still up for grabs because McNick will play St. Charles again. And I don't think St. Charles really has anything to worry about regionally. There's almost no chance that they don't make it to the state tournament just because of how the regional competition works. But big results there for D2.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, Fenwick to go to St. Charles and beat the Cardinals in 4 and then sweep St. Vincent St. Mary's right after. That shows the type of character in a team. And again, this was a team that took the 1 seed last year, was reverse swept at home by a 6 seed Baden, and I feel like that might have played with them going into this year. They needed to make some changes. They needed to get a little bit more better, maybe a little bit more resilient to try to get some results down the stretch. It felt like at times, and I think if you talk to the coaches, they'll probably get the same vibe from it, that try in general felt like a playoff matchup. They felt like this was a preview for what we're going to see at Wittenberg University Memorial Day weekend. It's going to be something that's going to dictate who wins state and who places at wherever they place. So again, that's a credit to Fenwick, and Big Nick's a tough team, right? It's tough to go on the road and do it. It's tough to get back-to-back results, to get St. Charles, who was the number 1 seed going into that matchup, and McNick, who started off the season in our number 1 ranking. That's a tough ask for Fenwick, but still, to be competitive like that, it shows maybe the Falcons can go the distance.
Yeah, we also saw McNick sweep Roger Bacon. So, maybe, starting to see kind of that upper tier Division II teams, St. Charles, McNick, and Fenwick having the best shot at taking it all the way this year. Speaking of Division II, we also had the Sales get the win in 4 over Bishop Watterson. So, we talked about the reason they probably weren't in our top 10 is because they had that loss to Bishop Watterson. Now with a more recent win, they'll enter our top 10 this year. So, I think it's awesome that they're building some momentum heading into the playoffs. But, we saw against, when they played St. Charles this week, not a challenge for the Cardinals to get it done. So probably not anything with playoff implications.
Yeah, probably not. It just maybe seeding in Region 5. That's what I'd point the finger at. But again, that's a credit to what we saw out of DeSales because you have a new coach. You have probably an entirely different six from last year. It feels like a new team. It doesn't feel like the DeSales we saw last year. So you have a lot of different pieces that are trying to communicate to each other. There are new philosophies trying to be driven in from Andrea Navarre, even though she was an assistant to Andy Feltz last year. So credit to DeSales and credit that they can still have some resilient pieces because we talked about this beginning of the year and you immediately put DeSales out of the top 10 or close to being out of the top 10. And you were saying, you know what, this DeSales team isn't it. And for them to respond the way they have, even after a rough start going 0-4 to start the season, it shows the type of resilience that the Stallions have for years to come.
Yeah, I'm betting they're not going to be down for long. I think this is probably a fluke year, but I see them rebuilding pretty quick here. So we get into some matches we're going to see this week. We mentioned it, X versus Pick North. I mean, that Pick North Judgment Day was the quad. This is like, hey, if you want it, I don't know. I don't think they're going to win. I honestly, my instinct is that X is going to stop them. I mean, just the way they played against other teams. That said, if Pick North is even to keep this like, hey, I-20 is sweet, or even, hey, maybe take a set off St. X, take 2 sets, get a win. Like, that would be huge. The fact they're still, 15-0, 16-0, something like that, undefeated, trying to prove that they belong in that, top 3 conversation, in that state tournament conversation, because we haven't really seen them play with the Liberties and St. X's. We talked about them being at a higher level. Pick North trying to prove they're at that higher level too.
Absolutely. And just to harp back to that point, we get a lot of messages from players, from coaches, from programs on our social media pages. And I think the one thing is after we post something about Pick North and they're always talking to us and we interact with our players, we interact with our fans. They've been saying now for maybe 2 or 3 weeks, can't wait till we play St. X. And this is a team that has a quad. They have a lot of matchups. And I was looking back a few weeks ago, I was looking at their schedule and I was like, you have 4 or 5 games until you play St. X. Why are you looking at that? But it kind of shows the type of mentality they have. They want to go for the best. In order to be the best, they have to beat the best. And that's what they're thinking right now. And again, who else but St. X, a team that in the Saturday morning matchups we've seen historically. I mean, I was on the call for a bunch of those where it always tends to go in favor of St. X, right? And this is a team, the Bombers in that case, coming off a win, in this case on Thursday night against LaSalle, changing that over to a matchup against Pick North. It just shows that sometimes it's going to be a trap game for both sides. But again, Pick North, they're coming in with the energy of 1,000 fires. It feels like that on Saturday.
Hey, that'll be real interesting to see. For the savvy viewer out there who knows the regional alignments, might be wondering why they're not playing Liberty. I would actually think that Liberty is probably one of the toughest teams to get on your schedule because, at least for this year, once conference is realigned, it'll have a little bit more room. But 14 league matches, Elite 8, Berlin quad, I guess, quad with Berlin, Brexville, and St. X. That's, 20 right there. OC Challenge is 21, and they usually like to play Darby and Mount Vernon. So that's 22. So it would be almost impossible to pick North to make a convince area before the season that they deserve to play them and get on their very competitive schedule. So, that would be, I kind of thought about that for a second. Like, well, if they're in the same region and they're also one of the best teams, why not play Liberty? But I think that would point to a reason why they're not on the schedule. We've also got the GCL Challenge coming up that Saturday. Lots of awesome D2 matchups. Based on what we've seen, we don't tend to see a lot of upsets outside of that very top portion of the Division II. So if everything goes as expected, the big match we're looking at is St. Charles versus McNick. I think even with the loss to Fenwick, if St. Charles is able to get a convincing win over McNick, they will go back in the #1 spot. But really, this is about playoff implications and seeding. For that Region 8 regional playoffs. We talked about it was a bloodbath last year. It'll be a bloodbath again this year, and we might have a little bit more, of a scripted regional final with, I think, Fenwick and McNick. There's almost no way that it's not that. But Roger Bacon could make a run too. So it's I don't know. It's gonna be really interesting to see how it turns out.
I think it's interesting when we get a fact that you have St. Charles and McNick, which could be the Division II state final. And the fact that we're seeing this team play again, even before the postseason, just shows the type of coverage that we've seen this year. Again, things can change, right? As I mentioned at the top of the season, McNick might get the 1 seed. Are they going to make it to the state? Who knows? There's a lot of things that can happen, but like you said, it's a big one. We know what St. Charles has been through, especially from this past weekend. We know what McNick has gone through, where finally they got the momentum to say, hey, you know what? We're now back to a #1 spot. Can we hold the crown? And now we're seeing this just back and forth dynamic between the two teams, and it's fun to watch.
Oh, 100%. We've also got the Muller Beaver Creek Jackson try, which we talked about with Lee Meyer. That has not been a fun time these past couple of years for those Crusaders. I think this year, based on what we've seen, there's a Muller team that their only losses, they're a 4-loss team, but 3 of them is St. X, which can't really fault them for that this year, and 1 in 5 to Derby in that third match in the Center Elite Eight tournament. So based on what we've seen from those 3 teams this year, I think Muller should be a 2-0. But with that atmosphere, you just never know. And we've also got Jerome hosting a try with Elder and Mount Vernon. With Jerome picking up some big wins and some impressive, taking Derby to 5 sets recently. Elder doing what they're doing, and Mount Vernon beating Berlin. It'll be interesting to see how those 3 teams that we kind of got hanging just outside of our top 10, how they end up faring.
Absolutely. And the biggest thing I see is with the GCL squads as well. I feel like Moeller, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like this Moeller team is a bit more consistent than what we saw last year, right?
Yeah.
Moeller last year was good, but at times, they were missing Will Patterson. At times they were missing Ben Hagerty, and you could tell there was a difference to it. This year, it feels like KCP per squad is just going at it, and they're being pretty consistent. It may not be the best in state, but it's still very consistent, and that's probably what you want, especially going into a matchup against Jackson and against some others that can really cause some trouble. Beaver Creek too, picking up a win in the Pick North quad. So they're also coming in trying to build off some momentum. And then Elder on the other side, basically all 3 teams in that Jerome try. The fact that if you can go 2-0, maybe you're back in the top 10. I would consider it at least, because those, in my opinion, are competitive matchups. Those are matchups that if it's even like a little bit different, if we get maybe a 25-15 set, for example, there's something worth talking about, because a lot of or basically all of these teams, a lot of these teams that have a lot of momentum from last year, a lot of momentum from 2 years ago in the case of Elder, kind of tapered off going into 2024. You have a chance against teams in the same realm as you go back. This can be a lot of momentum.
Yeah, and we talked about that Jerome taking Derby to 5. That was really pretty impressive, especially since we had that Berlin upset by Jerome, and it wasn't even. I was wondering, like, maybe was it a case of Derby putting in backups too early or something like that, fending off a reverse sweep? But actually, no, it was back and forth. I think Derby took the first, Jerome the second, Derby the third, Jerome the fourth, and then Derby the fifth. So this was a straight up competitive back and forth matchup. So big things coming out of Jerome. Since Derby was able to get the win, though, it sets up, the huge matchup for the OCC, Derby versus Berlin. Big implications there. Derby with the win there will be able to clinch the sole ownership of the OCC Cardinal. With a loss, assuming everyone wins out, they share it with Thomas Warrington. So big there for them. Derby had like 20 years in a row, I think, where they won the OCC Cardinal. Took a couple years off, got back to that last season. So very important to them and to their fans to be able to get that back. Now, just outside of the OCC Cardinal, it also sets up some interesting implications with the OCC Challenge, I think, for one. Based on how that goes, obviously teams in the same conference will play each other. But since the Derby guys that do the seeding, I would imagine that if they win out, they're probably going to put themselves against Liberty, and we maybe see Thomas against Pick North. Because we have the more recent head-to-head loss, Derby lost to Thomas. That's the argument. that Thomas should play Liberty. But I think if Darby loses to Berlin, it becomes a much more difficult argument that they should get to play Liberty at the UFC Challenge.
You never know what we could see from that, right? We saw
Mhm.
Darby beat Liberty last year, and a lot
Yep,
of people did not expect that. So
including us.
exactly. There's a big dynamic. I think the biggest thing is that there's a lot up for grabs when it comes to Region 3 seeding, right? When you have Darby, when you have T-Dub, you date back to last year too, right? None of us expected it. Both of us did not expect Beaver Creek to take the #1 spot. We thought it was going to be Darby. Now, Beaver Creek hasn't been the Beaver Creek that we saw last year, but Darby's continued to be Darby. And now Thomas Worthington looks much better than their 6th seed finish from last year. So there's a lot of that stripe between the OCC Cardinal, and that might be decide who gets the #1 seed and how that bracket basically gets shaped up in general, because we've seen at times where I don't think it was the case. Might be wrong, but I don't think that was the case in Region 3, but in others where you have the 4 seed, the 3 seed, and the 2 seed on the same side of the brackets, that can pay dividends when you're the #1 seed.
Yeah, and I think for Region 3, even who gets the 1 and 2 seed honestly isn't as important. It's what the 3, 4, and 5 seed coaches actually think. Because if the coaches of Region 3 and 4 and 5, or sorry, the coaches of the 3, 4, and 5 seeded teams look at the top seed, go, yeah, we can beat them. We don't want to play #2, and they all go to the #1 side. Like essentially, the #2 seed becomes the #1 seed because they have the easier path to the regional final. That's what they're really chasing. So I don't even think of the who gets the 1 seed necessarily matters as much. It's more so who the lower seeds choose to go after. Worth touching on, we made an Instagram post about it. So if you want the exact regional assignments, you can look at it there. But we just had some new teams in the state tournament, so that'll be really cool to see. But the big thing, East State and Christian and Carroll moving over to Region 5 to play with St. Charles. Obviously, Carroll probably not having the most successful year this year, so I don't think it'll affect anything this year. But should they stay there, it could be a pretty cool rivalry for the next couple of years. And Ned Grber was actually telling me that St. Charles may go up from D2 to D1 just because of their increased enrollment. So that would be pretty crazy to have the St. Charles Cardinals playing up at D1.
Yeah, and again, when I saw that announcement on our sheet, I was thinking this is kind of interesting. But then again, you look at what we saw from Berlin the past few years. We saw from
Yeah.
Brexville Broadview, right? There's a lot of teams that at times can have somewhat of a seamless transition from D2 to D1. And we ask a lot of questions. We asked Ned, why do you play St. X to start off the year? And he says, you know what? It's about competition, right? It's about getting your feet wet to start off the season. And if you want to be the best, you got to beat the best, and that's the type of mentality that he wants to bring to the Cardinals this year. And it feels like going to D1 is going to be tough. It's tough regardless. But when you go up against teams like St. X and you're challenging them on the road and you grab a set from them on a Monday evening matchup, that shows that you've got a little bit more momentum, that you can make that change overall. And then to Carroll and East Dayton Christian. I don't know that much about East Dayton Christian, but Carroll is one of those teams that can really show out in the GCL co-ed. They've been one of those teams that have been stalwarts in that for a long time. So all of a sudden, and we saw it with Carol Bizak and Beaver Creek, where not only is your focus now on Cincinnati and Dayton schools, you got to focus now on Columbus and try to get matchups against those schools. And all of a sudden, if you're Carolyn crew, you're probably thinking of how do you build your schedule for next year? You already have such a tough GCL co-ed matchup. Now you got to go up against probably the Region 5 stalwarts, and in St. Charles, if they stay in D1, you got DeSales, Bishop Hartley, Bishop Watterson. Maybe you make a move down to Chillicothe if possible. So there's a lot of interesting moving parts with Carroll, and we're going to see a very competitive schedule from them next year.
For our Division 1 rankings, we got Liberty obviously moving up into that 1 spot over St. X. Hilliard Derby, I was really debating about this because Thomas Worthington has the head-to-head win over Hilliard Derby, but I just think the way that Derby's played, they have the more impressive overall schedule. And obviously, they have the head-to-head over Moeller, head-to-head over St. Ignatius just from Saturday. Now, I think we differ a little bit on where we're placing Thomas Worthington. You want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think for me, it just came from the fact that everybody who played well at the Elite Eight deserves to be towards the top five. So Liberty, St. X, Derby, I was a little bit questionable at first. If they did not beat Muller, it probably would have been a bit lower. But because they do get the win over the Crusaders, they're up at 3, Muller at 4, Brecksville gets a pretty good win against Ignatius at 5. I think the biggest question for me, well, the first question in mind was the fact that St. Ignatius did beat Thomas Worthington earlier this year. It was early in the year. A lot has changed since then, but it was a sweep in favor of the Wildcats. And then again, Pick North, after a weekend you have, if you're Pick North, there's a lot going for that side. And they have a lot to be proud of, right? They have 3 quality matchups against teams that have flirted around the top 10 this year. Even Beaver Creek, to some extent, has flirted, even if not this year, then last year. They've cemented themselves as a top 10 team. And I don't want to bring them down because a lot of other teams have done a lot better. Now, I did to some extent, but they should not be overloaded that much because of it. Now, Thomas Worthington in general, still a good team. And to be honest with you, the entirety of my top 8 just looks so stacked. That's probably the strongest top 8 that I've seen since we started this podcast. So again, it's not really that much of a knock to Thomas Worthington. It's just a lot has gone on. A lot of teams are going better.
Yeah, a couple things there. I think for me, JT McGuire coming back to Thomas Worthington. I mean, it cannot be overstated how much of a difference it is. I think he's one of the best outsides of the state. Had he played a full season, probably first team all region, if not, even more up on the all state list. Pick North, the only thing is that, yeah, 3 quality wins, but it's 3 quality wins in comparison to the non-quality wins they've had before, right? You look at Mount Vernon, Berlin, Beaver Creek, all solid teams, all also not in the top 10. So I don't know. I think that factored into my decision a little bit. I think how they play against St. X, it'll be pretty clear. I'll be watching that stream. It's going to be pretty clear if it's like St. X dominance, who cares? This is just a random team we're playing. Or if it's like, hey, we got to, put in some effort to beat this Pick North team. That'll heavily influence where I put them at my top 8. And, I think a lot of that's going to come down to eye test, which will be tough. But, obviously still having a great season. Yeah, that's just kind of where my head's at. And then, we brought in Still Monroe Falls, obviously having a great season. Lakota East with the sweep at the pit. I mean, really awesome what they're doing so far this season. Definitely deserving of that number 10 spot. And then looking over at Division 2, pretty much what's to be expected there. Archbishop Nicholas taking the number 1 spot. Fenwick at 2, St. Charles at 3. Some chance for, hey, maybe St. Charles hops back up to number 1 spot. But outside of that, we talked about St. Francis de Sales coming at the number 10 over Watterson. Not too much to talk about there.
Yeah, pretty straightforward. And again, I feel like there's more of a hierarchy in Division 2, more of a clarity in Division 1 than Division 2. But even in this realm, we're starting to see a lot of teams kind of show out, a lot of teams kind of separate themselves from the pack, right? We know McNick's good, we know Fenwick's good, we know St. Charles is good. Bacon has not been in the realm a lot in terms of just streams that I've at least have been able to watch, but again, pretty good. When you go down the list a little bit, you're starting to see those separations. And I think because we see those separations, we start to assume that these are a lot of upsets that could be happening later in the year. But then again, a lot of these teams, especially in Region 8, are so close to each other, you never know what can happen once postseason starts.
Yeah, absolutely. We're looking at just kind of how this breaks down by region. It's really difficult for me to see a scenario where St. Charles did not come out of Region 5. It's pretty difficult for me to see a scenario where it's not Archbishop Hoban versus St. Mary in a regional final. How that goes, that's probably a toss-up. And, that Region 8, that's going to be a bloodbath, man. McNick, Fenwick, Roger Bacon, Baden, Sharma, Julian, and, maybe some surprise teams that, kind of like last year that we didn't really see coming. But really going to be excited to see how that one turns out. All right, and with that, this has been Ohio VolleyTalk. Gotta be honest, man, most of the time this does not feel like work, but I'm in Kansas City right now for nationals. So recording episode at 12:30 and then also waking up tomorrow. I don't know, it's be fun. But hey, it's a good episode. And once we get into it, it's been awesome. So any final thoughts?
Yeah, it's always awesome to be on here. It's also nice to be on the West Coast, which you got a couple hours behind where you are. But nonetheless, again, a lot of great matchups this weekend, and we're starting to see how the teams are unfolding as we head into the final stretch of the regular season.
Yeah, and hey, forgot to mention at the Elite Eight, hey, it's bucket list. I mean, if you're into Ohio volleyball, it's a place to be. So that was really awesome to get the experience. But hey, with that, it's been Ohio VolleyTalk. Maybe we'll catch you next week.